Granville Angel, Lord of Cannock, and an Austin enthusiast.
I am the Lord of Cannock, the local Lord of the Manor. My lineage goes back to 1535, and we've been here since that period of time. I am the 46th Lord of the Manor. It was previously held by 7 kings and numerous bishops of Lichfield and Coventry. First and foremost, I am a classic and vintage car enthusiast, but very usefully, from time to time I am approached and asked if I would consider providing one of my cars for a wedding. People that are married, using the car and being driven around by the local Lord of the Manor, get a certain panache from it. It's a talking point in the local pubs. It's just not Mr. Smith taking them to the church. And I think they enjoy it. I seem to get pleasure from it, which in turn gives me pleasure.
I wanna be with you every day, 'cause I got a feeling it's beginning to grow. There's only one thing I can say.
I bought my first Austin at Yeovil in Somerset, parting exchange it for a BSA Bantam motorcycle. A pregnancy forced me into the situation there we needed more carrying capacity, and a little Austin Ruby was the result, which I again kept for a couple of years. And then progressively I increased in size, from an Austin 7 to an Austin 10 to a 12 to a 16 and eventually to a 20 horse. The car was originally purchased by Mary Lady Collier Ferguson of Ightham Moat in Kent near Sevenoaks, and she bought it as the ideal ladies and gentlemen's town carriage, because the advertisement at the time said you buy a car but you invest in an Austin.
From new in 1936, the Austin led a rather aristocratic existence, chauffeuring the Collier Fergusons between Ightham Moat and their house in London. The outings and picnics with the grandchildren were fewer during the war years, but when hostilities were over, this pre-war Leviathan had itself become a casualty of the good life.
Immediately the war finished, she sold it to a local taxi firm at Bognor Regis. And from a life of luxury, it went to a life of toil. And they had it for 25 to 30 years, both as a commercial vehicle for weddings, funerals and taxi work. And in my estimation, they must have put at least 300,000 miles on the clock. So much so that when it was sold in the late 50s or early 60s, it was in a very distressed state.
And I saw it advertised for £15, and this was 1964. I wanted something a little bit different, but when I got to Bognor, where the car was, I just could not believe my eyes, because I didn't really think I'd get something this big. I immediately said, yes, OK, £15, and paid for it at the time. Very soon, of course, I realised it was somewhat expensive for a student to run it. It was 18 miles to the gallon of petrol, and about 18 miles to the gallon of oil as well. So I thought the best way to deal with this was to run trips to London, which I did. These were 10 shillings return. And so I managed to get 2 in the back on the tip-up seats, 3 on the full seat, and 2 nubile young female students on the front seat. For my amorous activities, I used to start in the front of the car and then hopefully progress to the rear. But I remember one occasion when things were going quite nicely in the front, and I was aware that the machine had started to move somewhat, but I'd knocked accidentally the handbrake, and we were rolling down the hill. So it, you'd probably say, well, did the car move for you, my darling? Well, it's 35 years, Grenville, since I've seen this car, and then it was completely all black. The oil, is it still drinking the oil at 18 miles to the gallon?
Well, that works out at about 2 miles to a pint.
No wonder I was a poor student.
Wishing you weren't so far away. Then I will
And I noticed the motif on the side. So we had it all piled up back there. Then there was another wonderful time when my mother and father were seated where I am now in the back here. And I was driving with my ex-bus conductor's hat in the front. The car started to boil, steam emanated, pulled over to the hard shoulder, lifted up the bonnet, and shortly the Kent Constabulary arrived. They apologised most profusely to my mother and father for the delay. Saw the hat, of course, and assumed that I was their official chauffeur. I had a very enjoyable 5 months with the car, and was sad to have to sell it for the princely sum of £3.
And the nerve of him! He sold it to his best friend.
It burnt enormous quantities of oil and left huge clouds of black smoke out the back of it as it went along. So the engine was obviously in dire need of some surgery. And to get the engine out, you have to remove virtually all of the front bodywork. Wings, the radiator cowl, the radiator. And having done that, I then proceeded to take almost everything else to pieces.
Gosh, Alan, what a difference since the last time I looked in this garage.
This car got stored away in various garages in its component parts, and they stayed there for about 24 years before eventually I met Granville.
Do you remember we had to bring 2 trailers down, not just one? 2 trailers because
one for the car.
One for the car.
One for all the
and
bits
one
and
for all
pieces.
That's right.
I think there were rather more bits and pieces than you had imagined.
Yes, well, if you remember, I saw it and went away for 17 months in sort of a shock trauma.
State of shock.
And thinking, what on earth am I considering doing? It was a period of rebuild over a 3-year period. I was very lucky to have a very dear friend and colleague, Ray, who sadly died just a few days ago, and he will be sadly missed. And I owe him a great debt of gratitude because he had skills that I didn't have, but between the two of us, we rebuilt this vehicle. It was very much rule of thumb, simple engineering and common sense, really, that put it together. I see myself just as a custodian for a few years, and then they'll go on to another owner. It's a part of our English social history, the growth and emergence of the motor car in its development, and I am just helping to preserve something of the past for the present and hopefully for the future.
It's years since I've driven a pre-war car, and it just within moments it felt just right behind the wheel again. Just absolutely lovely. And Granville's made a grand job of it. It goes really well.